What's happening, guys? This used to be Mike from Mike's Little Dragon channel, but now this is Mike from Let's Talk Comics. And I decided to change the name of the channel, and the reason I did that is when I initially made this channel, I made it to talk about Eric Larson's magnum opus, The Savage Dragon, and it kind of got into a little bit more than that. It kind of got into new releases, comic book news, nostalgia, things about comic books, wizard reviews, etc., comic book culture, stuff that was going on, talk about creators. And so after a while, it just kind of felt like it was necessary. Maybe not necessary, but I kind of just wanted to change the name of it. Mike's Little Dragon channel. I think it was kind of confusing to people sometimes. I saw somebody say one time that they thought that it was Totally Dragons, like the old PBS show. So I just decided to change it to Let's Talk Comics. And it's still going to be the same thing. A place to talk about comics, comic book news, new releases, comic book culture, conversations going on within comic books. Which leads me to my next point. Over the last week or so, maybe 2 or 3 weeks, I've seen on comic book Twitter people saying, "Are you a comic book fan if you don't read comics?" And I have to say that if you do not read comics, you cannot call yourself a comic book fan. Now, you can be a fan of the characters without having to read comic books. We live in a world today in 2026. It's very different than the world that I grew up in the 80s, where the only option you had to engage with these characters, back then maybe we would get a crappy Nintendo game, maybe a bad TV movie, or you get a cartoon that would come on once a week. But there was nothing like it is now, where you have animated movies of high quality live action movies, incredibly well produced and detailed video games. Like I said, now the way you can engage with the characters and participate with them is so vastly different than what it used to be, that I say that you can indeed be a fan of the characters without having to read the comic books. I replied that there are people who might say they love Batman and all they've ever done is play the Arkham games, and that's perfectly okay. That does not make you any more or less of a fan of Batman because you don't read it week to week, because you don't have Batman in your pull box. If all you're a fan of Batman is cosplaying Batman at your local convention, or buying the animated movies, or watching the next Robert Pattinson Batman, then you're a Batman fan. You know what I'm saying? I don't think you could call yourself a comic book fan, but your love of the character is just as valid as mine is through all my years of reading Batman comic books. Batman, detective, whatever. Reading Knight's End. And it's not just Batman. I'm just using Batman as a placeholder for this conversation. But I've seen a lot of people say you have to be a fan of comic book. You have to read comic books to call yourself a comic book fan. And I do agree with that, but I think that is where the conversation stops. As for being a fan of the characters, you can do that any way that you want. and your fandom is just as valid as mine, as someone who is a longtime reader of Wednesday books, new comics of Iron Man, Batman, whoever it is. For some strange reason, over this past couple of weeks, there's been a lot of like gatekeeping talk, about I'm more of a fan of this, I am more of a fan of that, and I don't really think that's necessarily the right mindset to have. We can all be fans of things that we don't actively participate in. I'm a fan of football. I'm not outside playing football every weekend. I've never played at any sort of organized level, but yet I sit down and watch it every Sunday, Saturday and Sunday. I saw somebody saying, just because you sit down and you walk video game walkthroughs, you can't call yourself a gamer. Well, I don't think you can call yourself a gamer if you do not actively play the game. But if you are someone like myself who is now, 50 years old, who works, 60 hours a week, some weeks, I don't have the time to video game like I used to 20 years ago. So I enjoy watching people play video games. I enjoy hearing people talking about playing video games. Now, I don't consider myself a gamer, but I can still have appreciation and enjoy what I am watching and what I'm seeing on the screen, and I know that I cannot engage with the particular fandom that actually picks up the controller and plays, but I can have conversation and I can get involved with it to an extent, So I think a lot of times, we shouldn't be talking about in absolutes, we should be talking about situational. Like I said, I'm situationally a video game fan, even though I don't play video games. Does my opinion matter? To an extent. And I can only contribute so much to the conversation when it comes to video games. But that's as much as I am able to participate in that right now. And as for comic books, there's a lot of people who are in the same situation. People who do not have access to weekly books. People who do not have monetary means to have a subscription box at their local comic book shop, So they are left to either pick up the occasional trade they see on the cheap, or all they can do is just cosplay or watch the movies when they come out, So we all have to do what's best for us in our fandom, in our hobbies that we enjoy, the characters that we love. As long as we are treating everyone, with respect and being respectful about how they take part in the fandom, as long as everyone's upfront about what they do, then we should all be able to get along in regards to that. We shouldn't have any gatekeeping in it. Now, I will say this. I will say that in regards to comic books, the one thing that I cannot sign off on is bootlegging of it, the pirating of comic books. If that is your only option, and well, not even that's, because a lot of times if you live overseas, that's your only option. But if you have options to read comic books outside of pirating, and you choose to not use those for selfish means or whatever means it is, then I can't in good faith say, oh, well, that's just how they participate in the medium. To me, that's a little bit different. That's a little bit more unscrupulous than just saying, okay, well, they like Batman even though they only play the Arkham games, or they like X-Men even though their only experience with X-Men is the animated cartoon, So as long as what we're doing is straight up with everyone else, letting them know, I don't see why we should have these guardrails and these labels of they're not a real this, or they're not a actual fan of that. You know, if you like the thing, you like the thing, and you're a fan of it. There's no quantifiers or anything to it. So that is today's comic book talk. Don't gatekeep. If people want to jump into something, let them jump into something. Let them enjoy it. You know, if you can enjoy it and get as much out of it as what someone else does who participates in the hobby a different way, then hey, let them do them. So till next time, this is Mike at Let's Talk Comics, and I'll talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.